There is a structure standing in the desert outside Cairo. It has been standing for 4,500 years. It is not the oldest thing humans have ever built, but it is the only one of the seven wonders of the ancient world still standing. The other six, temples, statues, gardens, are gone, collapsed, burned, forgotten. The pyramid endures. Not because it was lucky, not because the desert preserved it, because the people who built it understood something about permanence that no civilization before them had ever grasped, and very few after them have matched. This is the story of ancient Egypt, not the Egypt of Hollywood, of curses and golden masks and mysterious rituals. The Egypt of engineers, administrators, physicians, astronomers. The Egypt that looked at the world and decided, with extraordinary deliberateness, to build something that time could not destroy. They very nearly succeeded. Egypt should not exist. Look at a map. North Africa is among the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. The Sahara, the largest hot desert on the planet, stretches from the Atlantic coast of Morocco to the Red Sea. Almost nothing grows there. Almost nothing lives there. And running directly through the middle of it for 6,000 kilometers is the longest river in the world, the Nile. Every year, without fail, the Nile flooded. Not catastrophically, not the way the Tigris and Euphrates flooded Mesopotamia, unpredictably, violently, washing away everything in their path. The Nile flooded with a precision that the Egyptians came to regard, correctly, as the closest thing to a miracle the natural world could offer. Each July, the waters rose. Each September, they receded. And what they left behind, deposited across the narrow ribbon of floodplain on either side of the river, was the same dark, fertile silt that had washed down from the Ethiopian highlands. The Egyptians called it Kemet, the Black Land. They called the desert Deshret, the Red Land. The boundary between the two was absolute. You could stand with 1 foot in Kemet, lush, green, alive, and 1 foot in Deshret, barren, bleached, dead, and feel the line beneath you. The Nile did not just feed Egypt, it defined Egypt. It determined where life was possible and where it was not. It organized the entire civilization along a single axis, 2 to 20 kilometers wide, stretching from the first cataract at Aswan to the broad delta where the river fractured into the Mediterranean. And because the Nile flooded on a schedule, because the Egyptians could predict year after year when the waters would rise and when they would fall, they could do something no other ancient civilization had yet managed. They could plan. The calendar. Around 3000 before Christ, Egyptian astronomers noticed something. Every year, just before the Nile flood began, a specific star appeared on the eastern horizon just before sunrise. A star that had been invisible for 70 days, lost in the glare of the sun, suddenly reappeared in the pre-dawn sky. The star was Sirius. The Egyptians called it Sopdet, and its reappearance, its heliacal rising in astronomical terms, was year after year the most reliable predictor of the coming flood that any human society had ever found. The Egyptians built a calendar around it, 365 days, 12 months of 30 days each, with 5 additional days at the end of the year, days considered outside ordinary time, sacred to the gods. This is the calendar that Julius Caesar reformed in 46 before Christ. It is the calendar that Pope Gregory XIII adjusted in 1582. It is, with minor modifications, the calendar you are using right now. The calendar on your phone, the one that tells you when your meetings are, when your bills are due, when your holidays fall, is an Egyptian invention. Not an approximation of one, not a system inspired by one. The direct descendant of a calendar devised by astronomers standing in the Nile Delta, watching Sirius rise, 4,000 years before the birth of Christ. By 3100 before Christ, Egypt unified. This is the conventional date. The truth is more complex. Unification was probably a process, not an event, stretching across generations. But the symbolic moment is associated with a king the Egyptians called Narmer, and the historical record commemorates it on a carved palette of green schist that is now in the Cairo Museum. On one side, a king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. On the other, the same king wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt. 2 crowns, 1 head. What Narmer, or the kings who followed him, created was not merely a large kingdom. It was something the world had never seen before, a unified state. A political entity with a single central authority, a professional bureaucracy, a system of taxation, a standing army, a national religion, and a standardized system of weights and measures that applied from the Mediterranean coast to the first cataract of the Nile. 2,000 kilometers of territory, one administration. The Egyptians called this concept Ma'at, usually translated as truth or justice or cosmic order, but Ma'at was all of these things at once. It was the idea that the universe had a right order, that the pharaoh's job was to maintain that order, and that every institution of the state, the courts, the granaries, the priesthood, the army, existed in service of that maintenance. It was the first articulation of what we now call government legitimacy, the idea that rulers do not merely possess power, they are accountable to a principle larger than themselves. 3,000 years before Locke, 4,000 years before Jefferson, the Egyptians wrote it in stone. In 2560 before Christ, a king named Khufu built a tomb. It was not in principle different from the tombs that Egyptian kings had been building for 500 years. The Egyptians believed, with an intensity that pervaded every aspect of their culture, that death was not an ending, it was a transition. The body had to be preserved, the tomb had to be provisioned, the name of the dead had to be spoken, because as long as the name was spoken, the person was not truly gone. But Khufu's tomb was different in practice. 2,300,000 limestone blocks, the heaviest weighing 80 tons, the average weight 2.5 tons, quarried, transported, dressed, and stacked to a height of 146 meters, the tallest structure on Earth, with a precision that modern engineers still find difficult to explain. The base of the Great Pyramid covers 53,000 square meters. It is level to within 2 centimeters across its entire surface. Its 4 sides are oriented to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of less than 1/15 of a degree. In 2560 before Christ, without GPS, without steel, without the wheel, which the Egyptians, unlike the Mesopotamians, did not use for construction. For 4,000 years, it was the tallest structure humans had ever built. The record was not broken until the Lincoln Cathedral in England surpassed it in 1311 CE. But here is what history textbooks almost never tell you about the pyramids. We know who built them. Not slaves, not aliens, not some lost technology that modern science cannot replicate. Workers, Egyptian workers, tens of thousands of them, who lived in a purpose-built city near the pyramid complex, whose remains archaeologists excavated beginning in the 1990s. They ate beef and fish. They received medical care. Their broken bones were set and healed. They were buried with honors when they died on site. We have found the administrative records, the payroll ledgers, the work gang names, the friends of Khufu, the drunkards of Menkaure, inscribed in red ochre on the pyramid blocks themselves. The pyramids were not built by slaves driven by fear. They were built by a state that could mobilize, feed, house, and manage a workforce of 20,000 people over 20 years. That is the miracle, not the stones, the logistics. Part 5. Medicine. Around 1600 before Christ, an Egyptian physician wrote a book. We call it the Edwin Smith Papyrus, after the American dealer who purchased it in Luxor in 1862. It is the oldest surviving surgical text in human history. 48 case studies, head injuries, spinal trauma, chest wounds, fractures, each case presented in the same format: examination, diagnosis, treatment, prognosis. The prognosis comes in 3 forms: an ailment which I will treat, an ailment with which I will contend, an ailment not to be treated. That third category is the revolutionary one. 3,600 years ago, an Egyptian physician looked at a patient, saw a spinal injury so severe that paralysis was complete, and wrote, "This cannot be cured. I will not attempt to cure it." The concept of a medical prognosis, the idea that medicine operates within the limits of the knowable, that a physician's first obligation is honest assessment, not false hope, is an Egyptian idea, written on papyrus in hieratic script, 16 centuries before Hippocrates. The Edwin Smith Papyrus does not attribute illness to demonic possession. It does not prescribe prayer. It describes the mechanics of the human body, bones, muscles, tendons, and treats injury as a physical problem requiring physical solutions. Egyptian physicians knew the pulse was connected to the heart. They performed surgery with copper instruments. They understood infection, not the microbiology, but the observable fact that wounds became dangerous when not cleaned. The ancient Egyptian word for physician was sunwu. It appears in texts as early as 2700 before Christ. There were specialists, eye doctors, dentists, surgeons, whose titles we have found inscribed in tombs and on administrative records. The world's first known physician by name was an Egyptian called Hesire, who lived around 2650 before Christ. His title, Chief of Dentists and Physicians. He practiced his profession 300 years before the Great Pyramid was built.
Ready to unlock something amazing? You don't want to miss what's next. Every like, every comment, and especially every share helps us create more jaw-dropping content just for you. So hit that subscribe button right now to join our incredible community.
In 3200 before Christ, Egypt developed writing, not independently of Mesopotamia. The evidence suggests that the idea of writing, if not the specific signs, may have moved westward along trade routes from Uruk. But the Egyptian system, hieroglyphics, was not borrowed, it was invented. And it was something Sumerian cuneiform was not: beautiful. Hieroglyphics were not merely a practical tool for administration, they were art. The signs, over 700 of them in the classical period, were carved into temple walls, painted in tomb chambers, inscribed on jewelry and amulets, and the surfaces of obelisks that weighed 300 tons. The Egyptians did not separate writing from visual art. The two were, for them, the same act: the fixing of meaning into form, the conversion of the invisible into the permanent. Alongside hieroglyphics, they developed two cursive scripts, hieratic for administrative documents, demotic for everyday life, that allowed writing to be fast enough for practical use. Physicians wrote on papyrus. Administrators kept records on papyrus. Love poetry was written on papyrus. So were astronomical observations, mathematical tables, and legal contracts. The word paper comes from papyrus, the surface on which every document in the Western world was written, from Roman legal codes to medieval manuscripts to the Declaration of Independence, is named after the Egyptian invention. Egyptian mathematics was sophisticated enough to calculate the volume of a truncated pyramid, a formula that requires understanding something close to integral calculus, over 3,000 years before Newton and Leibniz formalized the concept. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, written around 1550 before Christ, contains 84 problems and their solutions: division, fractions, geometry, the calculation of areas and volumes. At the top of the papyrus, the scribe Ahmes wrote a description of his work that is, across 35 centuries, perfectly legible. Accurate reckoning, the entrance into the knowledge of all existing things and all obscure secrets. For most of its history, Egypt was not interested in empire. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of the civilization. The Mesopotamians, Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians were empire builders by instinct, perpetually expanding outward, subjugating neighbors, incorporating new territories. Egypt was not, fundamentally, that kind of state. Egypt had everything it needed. The Nile fed it, the desert protected it. On both sides, thousands of kilometers of inhospitable terrain that served as the most effective natural barrier any civilization ever possessed. For most of its 3,000-year history, Egypt's military doctrine was defensive: patrol the borders, repel the raiders, keep the road to Sinai clear. Then, around 1550 before Christ, something changed. The Hyksos, a people from the Levant, had occupied northern Egypt for over a century. A dynasty of foreign kings, ruling from a capital in the Delta, using technology the Egyptians had never encountered, the horse-drawn chariot. When the Theban king Ahmose drove the Hyksos out of Egypt in 1550, he did not stop at the border. He kept going, into Canaan, into Nubia, northward into Syria. The New Kingdom, the period beginning with Ahmose and running through Ramesses XI, from 1550 to 1070 before Christ, was the Egypt of empire, of Thutmose III, who fought 17 military campaigns and created an empire stretching from the Euphrates to the fourth cataract of the Nile, of Ramesses II, who fought the Hittites to a stalemate at Kadesh in 1274 before Christ, and then, rather than continuing the war, did something unprecedented. He signed a peace treaty. The Treaty of Kadesh between Ramesses II of Egypt and Hattusili III of the Hittites is the oldest surviving peace treaty in human history. Not a surrender, not the imposition of terms by a victor, a negotiated agreement between equals, mutual defense clauses, provisions for extradition of refugees, recognition of each other's territorial claims. The treaty was carved in hieroglyphics on the walls of Karnak Temple. A copy in Akkadian cuneiform was sent to the Hittite capital at Hattusa. Both survive. A copy of the Treaty of Kadesh now hangs in the entrance hall of the United Nations headquarters in New York. The oldest peace treaty in the world decorates the headquarters of the organization built to prevent world wars. To understand Egypt, you must understand what Egyptians believed about death. They did not fear it, not exactly. They feared the second death, the permanent death, the death from which there was no return. The physical body had to be preserved because the body was the anchor of the soul in the afterlife. This is why mummification existed, not as a ritual of mourning, but as a practical technology. Stop decomposition, preserve the form, give the soul something to return to. The brain was removed through the nose and discarded. The Egyptians did not know what it did. The heart was left in place. The heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, memory, everything the person had been. After death, the heart was weighed against a feather. The feather of Ma'at, cosmic truth. If the heart was heavier than the feather, weighted with lies, cruelty, injustice, it was devoured by a composite creature called Amit, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile. The soul ceased to exist. If the heart balanced the feather, the soul passed into the field of reeds, the Egyptian afterlife, where the land was fertile, the harvest is eternal, and everyone you had ever loved was waiting. This is a theology of moral accountability, not guilt managed through confession or sacrifice, not virtue rewarded by arbitrary divine favor, a weighing, an honest, impersonal reckoning. You lived, you acted. At the end, the scales did not lie. 35 centuries before the Last Judgment, 4 millennia before the concept of moral universalism entered Western philosophy, the Egyptians placed the scales in the underworld and called it justice. Nothing lasts forever, not even Egypt. After the New Kingdom, Egypt fragmented. Libyan dynasties, Nubian kings, Assyrian invasion in 671 before Christ, the same Assyrians who were simultaneously dominating Mesopotamia, Persian conquest in 525 before Christ. And then, in 332 before Christ, a young Macedonian general entered Egypt without resistance. Alexander the Great was 24 years old. The Egyptians, exhausted by Persian rule, welcomed him. The oracle at Siwa, deep in the western desert, declared him the son of Amun, the king of the gods. Alexander was crowned pharaoh. He founded Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast and left before the city was finished. He never returned. His general Ptolemy inherited Egypt after Alexander's death. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled for nearly 3 centuries. Greek kings who adopted Egyptian religion, who built temples in the classical Egyptian style, who were worshipped as gods in the tradition of the pharaohs. The last of them was a woman, Cleopatra VII. Not the Cleopatra of Hollywood legend, but a serious, intellectually formidable ruler who spoke 9 languages, was the first Ptolemaic ruler to bother learning Egyptian, and spent her reign attempting, with genuine strategic sophistication, to keep Egypt independent from Rome. She failed. In 30 before Christ, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, entered Alexandria. Cleopatra killed herself rather than be paraded through Rome in chains. Egypt became a Roman province, but it did not become Roman. The temples kept functioning. The priests kept performing their rituals. Egyptian farmers kept farming the Nile floodplain the way their ancestors had farmed it for 3,000 years. Roman emperors had themselves carved on temple walls in the guise of pharaohs, making offerings to Isis and Horus. In the 4th century after Christ, the Emperor Theodosius closed the pagan temples of the Roman Empire. The temple at Philae, on an island at the first cataract of the Nile, the last functioning temple of the old Egyptian religion, was closed in 537 CE. The hieroglyphic script, 3,000 years after its invention, was abandoned. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 394 CE on the walls of the Temple of Isis at Philae. For 1,400 years, no living person could read it. In 1799, soldiers in Napoleon's army, digging fortifications near the town of Rashid in the Nile Delta, unearthed a stone, black granodiorite, inscribed in 3 scripts, hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Greek. The Rosetta Stone. In 1822, a French scholar named Jean-François Champollion used the Greek text as a key and deciphered the hieroglyphics. What the scholars found inside those temples, those tombs, those papyri, was not a primitive religion, not a cult of death, a civilization, complete, coherent, stretching across 3,000 years with an internal consistency of purpose that no subsequent culture has matched. They invented the calendar, the concept of the state, empirical medicine, monumental architecture, the material we call paper, the oldest surviving peace treaty, the oldest surviving surgical text, a theology of moral accountability older than any religious tradition still practiced on earth. And they asked, in the end, only one thing of history, that the name be spoken. Because as long as the name is spoken, the person is not truly gone. Egypt, Kemet, the Black Land. The name has been spoken for 5,000 years. It will be spoken for 5,000 more.
If you want to uncover more hidden stories, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends.